Hello everyone, my name is Naqi and I am an alumnus of University College London. I did my master's here in systems engineering and currently work for Barclays. Just to let you know, I'm completely blind, so I'm not wearing these sunglasses just to look cool. So to give you an idea of what I do at Barclays, I work in the head office and am part of a graduate program, which is a 2-year scheme that involves 4 6-month rotations. And I'm currently in my first rotation, which is in business transformation, and my specific team is called Performance Framework. The basic idea behind the team is to try and improve the culture in the bank, and that is done through things like performance management of people, reward and recognition, business planning, so on and so forth. So of course, the first couple of weeks involved lots of learning, getting to know the bank, the culture, getting to know my team, and slowly taking on bits of work. And I'm currently working on a risk assessment for my team and hope to get involved in more significant projects. So I have 3 more rotations to go before I finish my grad scheme and transition into a more permanent role. So I did my undergraduate in industrial engineering and then went on to work for an engineering company for 2 years. I didn't really enjoy my role and felt that I had become a little stagnant. So I wanted to do something that would challenge me and help me grow intellectually. So I applied to various universities for master's programs and came to UCL, which is a choice that I'm really pleased with. I came here thinking that I wanted to continue in engineering because I really enjoyed industrial engineering and my program was absolutely wonderful. I was quite keen to pursue something in engineering or optimization or software development, and I applied to loads of companies in that regard as well. There were a few finance companies and banks that I applied to, but primarily to do with stuff on the technical side of things. So that's what my plan was, but life had something else in store for me, and little did I know that I'd end up in banking. But having said that, I'm very pleased that I did end up here because it's given me a different perspective on things, and the skills and knowledge that I have acquired as part of my engineering degrees is and will be incredibly useful in the job that I'm doing at the moment as well. 2 skills that really spring to mind in the 2.5 months that I have spent in the bank that have been really useful for me are, number 1, attention to detail, because that is something that is incredibly important in engineering, to make sure that you specify your assumptions, to make sure that you capture as much detail so as to get as close to the solution as possible. The other one, I guess, would be more technical and more specific to what I did. So my team tasked me with the risk assessment for 2018, and I felt that some of the concepts that I did in my undergrad and masters pertaining to risk have come in very handy. And while those were more specific to engineering, perhaps more quantitative, the underlying ideas are still the same. And I'm sure that as I progress and move on to do different things in the bank, that different perspective and some of those technical skills and that mindset will be of enormous value, which is why a lot of companies, be it fintechs or banks, are taking on graduates from all sorts of backgrounds because each one of them comes equipped with a different skill set. So one of the things that really took me by surprise, so when I came to London for the first time in October 2015 to do my master's, it was a 1-year program and I thought I'd probably apply for jobs towards the end of my master's, and lo and behold, I was told that a lot of graduate programs, they close their applications a year before you actually start your job. So by the time I had heard this, I think it was already January or February, and a lot of graduate schemes had already closed. And my challenge was not just as simple as getting a job, it was actually getting a job where an employer would be willing to sponsor me for a visa because I am an international student. So The first thing for me was to go to the career service at UCL, which was really useful, particularly because different countries have different CV formats. And where I came from, I had a 6-page CV, and that is absolutely unacceptable here. And it was a pain kind of get down to 2 pages, but hey, I got there with the help of the career services. Then I guess the next step was to look at some of the things that I was interested in, to look at which companies are on the Tier 2 sponsor list. And the UCL Rights and Advice Center was particularly useful with that because they have lots of information about which companies can sponsor and have the Tier 2 license. So after bringing my CV down to 2 pages, looking at which companies sponsor and what my interests are, I started looking at different companies and their grad schemes because I was really interested in a graduate program because it would give me an opportunity to go and work in different departments, exposing me to the business and helping me discover what I really enjoyed. Because at university, just like many of us, we're quite confused about what we want to do, what will we be really good at, because the practical world is very different from university. So I applied for companies, didn't have much success. A lot of companies turned me down the moment they found out that I need a visa to work, because a lot of companies that are on the Tier 2 sponsor list do not actually sponsor visas because of how much of a hassle it is for them to do that, and they can easily get talent from within the UK or the EEA countries. So I continued to persevere and diversified my options. So as I had mentioned earlier, I applied to IT companies, engineering, banks, and basically any company that offered a job that was appealing to me. And along this way, obviously, I continued to seek advice from career services, from other organizations. One of them that springs to mind is Blinded Business. They help visually impaired people with things like, do you disclose your disability when you first send your CV? Because that can really put off a lot of employers. So I continued to develop my CV, my cover letter, and at the same time practice for interviews, look at assessment centers and stuff, because if you leave all of that till the last minute, you aren't going to get very far because there is enormous competition. And because I wasn't familiar with the recruitment process here, I had to learn everything from the beginning. But it was a really exciting thing to work on because I was able to develop new skills and able to work with fun people in a nice environment. So I did all of those things in parallel and made sure that any company that offered me an interview, I made sure that I researched what they did, researched a bit about the industry and the particular type of interview that they would conduct. So that would either be competency-based or strengths-based, for example. And there's other things that are really useful, which are, for example, to connect with people on LinkedIn that work for that company or that industry, so you can get an idea of what kind of things are you expected to do. So that was briefly the process that I took. Not the most organized, but hey, it worked. So in terms of declaring my disability, I was quite upfront about it, but in a more subtle way. So for example, in my CV, I wouldn't say that I'm completely blind, because what's the point? But what I would say is, for example, I was a semi-finalist in the visually impaired tennis championships, which I was. And that would obviously shed light on an achievement, but also tell them that, hey, this guy is visually impaired. Because my thing was that if I declare certain things later, such as my disability or the fact that I need a visa to work in the UK, it would be a waste of my time and the company's time, because they would take me through the process and at the end say, sorry, we can't hire you because we can't sponsor a visa, for instance, or we can't give you this job because it's not suitable for someone that is visually impaired. So this is a very personal choice, and for anyone listening, one size does not fit all. So see what's best for you, but make sure that you give it enough thought, because you want to be honest, but at the same time, you don't want to give a bad first impression. Given that many companies do not know the process for visas themselves, I did a lot of research on what is the process like, what to do with things like the resident labor market test, for example, which is a big thing for companies hiring talent from overseas. Now, students luckily are exempt from that test, students on a Tier 4 visa, but a lot of companies still don't have the information. So I did a lot of research into that and became an immigration lawyer of some sorts. I also applied, and as I had mentioned earlier, told companies upfront that I would need a visa. So one of the companies offered me a job, but unfortunately the Home Office said we can't sponsor your visa. So then Barclays offered me a job, and the Home Office said, hey, we can sponsor a visa, which was great. Now there's a lot of work that goes on into obtaining a Tier 2 visa, and my issue was I had to leave the country because my student visa had expired and was applying for a Tier 2 visa from outside the UK, which meant that I was subject to the resident labour market test. But because I'd done my research, I knew that some companies that do the milk round, which is one form of the resident labour market test, that they can tick that box, which was great for me because that was the case with Barclays. And the legal team over there was really, really useful in giving me information, in telling me what documentation I need. And I think the really important thing is to make sure you have all your documentation in place, to make sure anything that is not right in your application, so it could be a past rejection or past refusal, for example, you make sure that you say why that was and why it was overturned later. So it's a lot of work, but it's worth it at the end. You do have these experts like your professors or people in the career services, for example, but you need to do your own homework. I've heard that only about 2% of international students manage to get a job in the UK. And when I read that statistic, I was like, oh my goodness, will I be in the top 2%? The lucky 2%. And it was really easy to give up because I spent months and months applying to companies only to hear, sorry, we can't sponsor your visa. You are good, but we can't sponsor your visa. So I was quite determined, and it was really easy for me to give up, go back home and get a well-paid job with a UK degree, and it will be for you as well. But let me tell you that if there's something that should motivate you, it should not be money. Because I've worked before my master's and I got paid really well, but because I wasn't stimulated intellectually, I did not get that job satisfaction. So I was very determined to stay in the UK and not give up because this place offered me the independence to live on my own as a person who is disabled. And that's not something that I was able to get back home. The other thing, of course, is I love sports and I get to do a lot of visually impaired sports here. I have tried all sorts of things from tennis, running, cycling, goalball, ice skating, rock climbing, archery, sledging, and God knows what else. I've also had an opportunity to do a TED Talk at UCL, which was really the highlight for me and one of my watershed moments here. So London is a place that is full of opportunities and a place which is a melting pot where everyone comes together. So the journey ahead, particularly for international students, will be hard, but don't give up. So the recruitment process for companies can be quite different, and every company would have its own recruitment process. And in fact, even within a company, different streams would have their own process. So I applied for consumer banking, which is retail banking, and the process was slightly different to, let's say, someone that applied for the corporate bank. So for me, or for consumer grads in general, the process last year was a bit different than it is this year. So last year, you first register your interest on the website, and then you have to do 2 fun tests where you get a chance to see some scenarios in the business and then answer some questions to see whether those are some things that interest you. And if you clear those, then you move on to a telephone interview. And I've heard there is no telephone interview from this year. So I had a telephone interview which was mainly strengths-based and values-based. And what strengths-based means is that they ask you about certain strengths. So for example, what are you really good at? Or what do you enjoy doing? What are some of the things that you leave on your checklist for the end of the day? those kinds of stuff that you can't really prepare for, unlike competency-based, where you can, to an extent, rehearse answers. The values-based is more about, so Barclays is very, very passionate about its values and wants to make sure that every employee lives its 5 values of respect, integrity, service, excellence, and stewardship. So the interviewer has a question for each one of those values and how you've demonstrated them so far. That was a telephone interview, went quite well. And then the last thing was a face-to-face interview along with a case study. So my face-to-face interview was with one of the managing directors, and it was along the lines of my telephone interview, so strengths-based and values-based, except that, of course, it was in a bit more detail because it was face-to-face. But the more interesting bit for me was the case study. So I was sent a case study, I think a week in advance, or less than that, and I had to answer certain questions that they'd asked about analyzing that and then present my findings to the interviewer during the interview. And it was more like a conversation where the interviewer challenged me on certain ideas. And one thing which I found quite useful, which might be relevant to a lot of people watching this as well, being wrong is not necessarily a bad thing. So if someone challenges you to say, why have you put this answer? I don't think this is right. It's perfectly okay because we aren't as experienced as they are and they know better. So for example, one of my cost estimates was wrong and the interviewer challenged me on that, and I was perfectly happy with that. And I talked him through my thought process and why I thought that his estimation was much better because I hadn't considered a factor that he had because I wasn't exposed to the banking world before. And he was perfectly okay with that. So I think interviewers generally want people to be honest and want people to admit some of the things that they aren't good at, but are willing to improve on that and learn that. So after I had that, it was a week of anticipation before I got the great news that I did get the job. I would say every phase of your life, school, college, university, work, has its own challenges, has its own fun elements. For one, when you're working, you get to earn money. And you get to have the evening to yourself most of the time, which is not often the case when you're a student. But when you're a student, you have a lot more flexibility. You have no one else to report to. If something goes wrong, you're the only one that suffers. Whereas if you make a mistake while at work, it could potentially affect a lot of people and your customers as well. So I quite enjoyed my time at university. I quite enjoyed my time at work. And what I would tell you is enjoy every moment. It does get tiring, but hey, if all days are easy, then you'll never appreciate the good ones. And make sure that when you come across a challenging situation at work, use the graduate card, as they say. Go up to people that are a bit more senior, tell them that I'm new to this business. Can you talk me through this? Because I think you have a lot more experience. And you'll be amazed. Everyone is really keen to talk to you about what they do, about how they can be of help. And I found networking to be an incredibly powerful tool to gain more visibility in the organization and to get a better understanding of how things work, because the experts are the best people that can tell you about it. But I would say when you work, keep that work-life balance, because you aren't here just to work for someone else or just to make money. It's about growing yourself. It's about challenging yourself. It's about stimulating yourself intellectually, but also having fun along the process. So when you're nearing retirement, you can look back at those 30 years and go like, I achieved a lot, but I had a lot of fun as well.